So, thus have I heard. So if you hear these words, thus have I heard, then you know you're going to hear a story about the Buddha. Because these words were spoken by the Buddha's closest friend, Ananda. And he remembered all the events that happened in the Buddha's life and collected them all together. And then all the stories we know about the Buddha's life were told by Ananda. And they all start with him saying, thus have I heard, or I heard this. And then usually it follows, on one occasion. So thus have I heard, on one occasion. So this is a story for about 2,500 years ago, about 500 BC, in northern India, in a region called Kusala, north of the river Ganges. And there's a Brahmin, a kind of religious man from the Vedic tradition, walking along a road, a kind of trade road between two important cities. And Dona's walking along, and he can see ahead of him another man walking along. And he's following this man walking along. And he's looking down at the floor, and he starts to notice there's something different about the footprints of this man. When he's following the footprints of this man along this dusty road, he can see what looks like spokes and a wheel being imprinted in the footprints in this dusty road. So this is really like what's going on. Dona's thinking, what is this? I've not seen this before. And it's before the days of like branded footwear where you'd have a kind of Nike symbol or an Adidas symbol. This was two men walking barefoot along a dusty road in India. So he decides to follow these footprints and to follow this man because he wants to know what's going on, what's happening. So he notices the footprints lead off this track and into a forest, into like a wooded clearing. And he follows the footprints and he notices a man sitting against a tree, meditating. His legs are folded in meditation position. His body is upright. And I'll just read the words that are translated from Ananda's account. Then Dona, following the footprints, saw this man sitting at the root of a tree, confident, inspiring confidence. His senses calmed, his mind calmed, having attained the utmost control and tranquility, tamed, guarded, his senses restrained, a naga. So the word naga here is used sometimes to describe the Buddha. It means a kind of substantial, weighty being. And this is the man that Dona has followed into the woods is the Buddha. And the Buddha is meditating against a tree, probably doing something like the mindfulness of breathing. He's established mindfulness. His mind is completely tranquil, completely calmed. And he's exuding a confidence. It makes Dona feel inspired and confident just being around this man. So he approaches the Buddha and asks him, "Are you a deva?" He's kind of, Dona is curious, what kind of, this isn't an ordinary man. Maybe it's not even a human being, like his feet are making marks in the ground. He's exuding an energy, like there's a presence of, he's never encountered anything like this before. So he's wondering in his mind, what kind of category of being is this? Because in the Vedic tradition and in Indian cosmology, there's lots of different types of beings. So he asks him, "Are you a deva?" And a deva is a kind of celestial being, like a heavenly being. "Are you a deva?" Because he seems so kind of heavenly and divine and tranquil. And then the Buddha answers, "No, Brahmin, I'm not a deva." And so Dona says, "Are you a Gandharva?" Which is a kind of another celestial being, a celestial musician. And the Buddha says, "No, I'm not a Gandharva." "Are you a Yaka?" And a Yaka is more like a protector, kind of a nature spirit that's associated with protecting scriptures or forests in the Vedic tradition. And the Buddha says, "No, I'm not a Yaka." So then kind of Dona scratching his head and says, "Well, are you a human being?" And the Buddha says, "No, I'm not a human being." So this has really stumped Dona now. He's like, "Well, I've asked you, see, you're not a deva, you're not a Gandharva, you're not a Yaksha, you're not a human being. What are you?" And well, the Buddha replies, he says, all the taints, all of the pollutions, all of the taints that would cause me to arise, to be a Yaksha or human being or Deva, they've all been destroyed. And And he says, just like a red, blue or white lotus born in the water, grown in the water, rising above the water, stands unsmeared by the water. In the same way, I, born in the world, grown in the world, having overcome the world, live unsmeared by the world. Remember me, Brahmin, as awake, as awakened. So this is the Buddha. The Buddha donor wants a category to try and pin the Buddha down, and the Buddha can't be pinned down. It's not easy to describe what a Buddha is. And he resorts to metaphor. The Buddha says, well, imagine a lotus flower growing up. And in India, apparently, lotus flowers will grow in really, really muddy, polluted waters, but they'll grow out of that and just look radiant and so beautiful and pristine. So the Buddha uses that as a metaphor for him. Well, I've been born in this world, but I've kind of risen above all of the pollution, all of the muck, all of the mire, completely unsullied by that. And he also uses a second metaphor. He says, I'm awake. So he describes, in this way, he compares the rest of consciousness, the rest of humanity, as being asleep, as if in a kind of daydream, just not wandering around in a kind of sleep state. And he is woken up from that state. The wisdom that he's attained, it's as though he's woken up from this sleep state. And that's where the term Buddha comes from. It means awake, he who's woken up. So that's why he became known as the Buddha. And he said to Dharma, you can know me as someone who's awake. So this was an encounter with the Buddha, an encounter with enlightenment. And that's our series. This is our series for the next couple of months or more. We're going to be looking at and hearing about different encounters with the Buddha, different encounters with enlightenment. And hopefully we will get a glimpse of that ourselves. We'll encounter the Buddha to an extent ourselves as we do that. And why is this important? Why are we doing that? Why is it important to learn about the Buddha, to contemplate the Buddha? I think there's a couple of reasons why this is important. One is because our relationship to the Buddha tells us a lot about what Buddhism is, the nature of our Buddhist path. And also it tells us about ourselves. So I'll explain what I mean by that. So the Buddha says he isn't a god. So Buddhism is different, as you'll probably know from theistic religions. Buddhism doesn't have a god who is going to rescue you or save you. The Buddha isn't going to do that. The Buddha isn't a god. And that's very, very significant for Buddhism. But the Buddha also says he's no longer a human being. So we'll hear the Buddha was born as a human being, but his consciousness has changed so radically, it wouldn't be correct to call him a human being anymore. His consciousness is so different, so transformed from other human consciousnesses. He's no longer a human being. So the Buddha said, well, we have some verses, we have a puja, we have some verses that we chant at important occasions. And they say, the Buddha was born as we are born. What the Buddha overcame, we too can overcome. And what the Buddha attained, we too can attain. And this helps us to inform what our relationship to the Buddha is and what Buddhism is really, that the Buddha had attained a radically different consciousness, unlike anything probably that we can imagine. So it's difficult to talk about the Buddha and what the Buddha, and to kind of pin down what the Buddha is. But the Buddha said that, well, he was born into the same human situation that we are born into, and what he had to overcome are the same things that we have to overcome, that we can overcome. And the path and the teachings that the Buddha has given us are ways to overcome the things that he overcame, which means that we can attain that state that the Buddha attained. That is available to us. So Buddhism is radically different from other religions because the goal of Buddhism is available to us. The ideal of the Buddha, of human enlightenment, is available to us. So when we are getting into relationship with the Buddha, we're getting into relationship with our own potential. This is us at the end of our Dharma journey, at the end of our spiritual journey, a fully awakened human being. If we continue to practice the Buddhist path, this is what lies ahead. And each step of that path, we become more awake, we become wiser, we become kinder. So the Buddha, in exploring what the Buddha is, we're both exploring the nature of Buddhism, but also our own potential. So each week as we encounter the Buddha and get glimpses of the Buddha, we'll be getting glimpses, hopefully, of our own potential qualities, our own potential. So, yeah, the Buddha used metaphor to try and evoke for people a sense of what the Buddha is. And as well as metaphor, I think the stories that the Buddhist tradition hands down to us are a brilliant way of getting to know the Buddha. As I mentioned, Ananda, one of the Buddha's closest friends and disciples, has captured lots and lots and lots of these stories of the Buddha, loads and loads of them. And there's some wonderful stories, wonderful accounts of the Buddha just walking along barefoot along the dusty roads of India and encountering different people. And as if we can bring those stories alive and enter into those stories, the Buddha comes alive through those stories, those interactions come alive, and it's as though you're there kind of witnessing or interacting with the Buddha. And we can get a glimpse of what it might have been like, what it might be like to encounter the Buddha. So over the coming weeks, we'll hear stories of the Buddha meeting people and responding to them in different situations. And sometimes he shows tremendous kindness or generosity when he meets somebody. Other times he's demonstrating tremendous strength or forbearance. Sometimes we'll hear about his death and illness, how he faced that. Sometimes what you get a sense of is the Buddha's sharp mind, the sharpest of minds and intellects, and the clearest of teachings that he's able to give to people. Other times it's just always an uncanny empathy, where he's able to just really judge or get a sense of what the person he's meeting, who they are, where they're coming from, what they need to hear. It's amazing empathy that the Buddha could have, where he could really meet people and then respond with just the right teaching that they needed. So as we hear these stories, we're going to be encountering enlightenment in the weeks to come. And what I want to do is recommend some books about the Buddha. So this book is simply called Encounters with Enlightenment. And I read this probably about 20 years ago, something like that. It's out of print now, but Hilary, who runs a bookshop, has managed to get some copies, and they're in the bookshop at the moment. And Vimala Dasa has managed to persuade Windhorse to let us have an e-copy of the book, PDF copy for free, which we'll be sharing. And this is stories of the Buddha retold, and they're wonderful stories. I also recommend The Life of the Buddha by Nyanamoli, Bhikkhu Nyanamoli, and Gautama Buddha by Vishvapani. Some really, really good books about the life of the Buddha. If you like these stories and you want to know more about it, then these are the books to read. Okay. So stories are a really, really wonderful way of getting to know the Buddha, getting to know enlightenment, what it might be like. And also just kind of those, as we contemplate the Buddha, those qualities of the Buddha become stirred in us. They start to wake up in us. The qualities of kindness or wisdom or compassion become stirred and activated in us as we encounter the Buddha. The Buddha really came alive for me as well when I went on pilgrimage to northern India. So this was back in 2011, and it was the first pilgrimage that we'd organised from the Sheffield Buddhist Centre. There's been a few since then, and there might be one in a few years' time, so keep your eyes peeled for that. But going to the place where the Buddha actually lived and these events actually happened, it really, really changed my relationship to the Buddha. It's like much, much more real. Those events became much, much more real, just kind of living and breathing that same air, that same environment. So I'd really recommend going on pilgrimage. It's a really good way to bring the Buddha alive. But also puja, ritual, mantra, meditation. We'll be bringing those elements into this series as well. So we'll be exploring different ways of meeting the Buddha and bringing the Buddha alive. And during the course of this series, asking, well, what was the Buddha like? What is the Buddha like? And can these stories inspire me to bring those qualities into my daily life? You could be asking yourself that. Another good question is, what would the Buddha do in this situation? If you find yourself in a tricky situation in your life, well, how would the Buddha respond to this situation? What would the Buddha do? Sometimes that gives you a really good clue as to what to do in this situation, how to respond. What would the Buddha do? Okay. So we're going to be accompanying the Buddha each week on his travels as he walks along these dusty roads of northern India, meeting people, encountering, and they encounter the Buddha, they encounter enlightenment and respond in different ways. But tonight, our journey begins where the Buddha's journey began, with this phrase, the Buddha was born as we are born. So I want to take us back to the early life of the Buddha, before he was enlightened, to where his Dharma journey began, to where, in a way, where Buddhism begins, with what's called the four sights. It's a story from the early life of the Buddha, and it's a story where the Buddha is really, really transformed by seeing four sights. So we're told that the Buddha was born approximately 500 BC, so approximately 2,500 years ago, in northern India. And he was born into a clan called the Shakyan clan, and these were a proud warrior clan. They were a fierce, proud warrior clan. And the Buddha was born as a prince. He was born to the king of this clan, the king Suddhodana and Queen Maya. So he was a prince. He was called Prince Siddhartha. That was his name. And when he was born, we're told that a wise man made a prophecy, a wise seer prophesied that at a certain point in his life, two paths would open up for Siddhartha. And either he would become a great ruler, a great world-ruling king, or he would become disillusioned with wealth and power, give it all away, and become a spiritual master and a world teacher. So when this prophecy was made, King Suddhodana, the Buddha's father, Siddhartha's father, was determined it would be the first path. He was going to become a king. He was going to become a ruler like himself. So he tried to engineer things and create an environment where that would happen. And so he tried to give Siddhartha the best training in combat as a warrior, the best training in things like politics and economics to become a ruler, to become a king. And he tried to give him the most pleasurable life he could have, the best of everything. So they lived a wealthy life in palaces. He had, the best entertainment that was possible, musicians, the finest food, servants, lovers. And when it was time for Siddhartha to be married, a beautiful princess was found for him, Princess Yasodhara, and they had a son together, Rahula, Prince Rahula. So Siddhartha had the best of everything. He had the best life, the best that life could offer. But for Siddhartha, something was amiss. He wasn't content. He was restless. He became uneasy in his life. He became agitated. Everything seemed hollow to him. Something was missing. Something wasn't right. And he had this urge, this longing, this urge to go outside the palace and to look for answers. So he asked the chariot driver, who was called Channa, to take him out into the city and to take him out. And he just wanted to go out. He wanted to look, to see what he could find, just to look for answers. And he was taken out into the city. And then he saw something that took him aback, something he had never seen before. And it startled him. And he said to Channa, "What is this? What is this, Channa? What is this? What is this?" And Channa said, "Well, that's an old person. That's an old man. He's lost his hair. He's lost some teeth. He's wrinkled. He's kind of bent over. He's using a stick to walk. That's someone who's old. That's an old person." And we're told that Siddhartha had been so sheltered by his father, he'd never seen an elderly person before, and he was really taken aback by this. So he asked Channa, "Well, is this going to happen to everyone? Does this happen to everyone? Is this going to happen to me?" And Channa said, "Yes, old age happens to everybody. Will it happen to my wife, to my son, Rahula?" And Channa said, "Yes, this happens to everybody." So Siddhartha was really taken aback by this, really shocked and stirred up, and just said, "Well, take me back to the palace." So he's taken back to the palace, and he had still all the pleasure, all the distraction, the discontent, and now this kind of reflection on old age and the truth of old age to turn around in his mind. And a few days later, he was taken out again by Channa. He wanted Channa to take him out again into the city. And this time he saw a different sight that we're told apparently he'd never seen before. And this was a person bent over on the side of the road, vomiting in lots of pain, and being helped by other people. And Siddhartha said to Channa, "What's going on? What is this, Channa?" And Channa told him, "Well, this is a sick person, Siddhartha. This person is sick. They're unwell." And Siddhartha again said to Channa, "Well, will this happen to me? Will this happen to Yasodhara? Will this happen to my son?" And Channa said, "Yes, this happens to everybody." And Siddhartha, was really rattled by this, really stirred up by this. And he was asking himself, well, what's the point of all of this wealth? What's the point of life, really? If I'm going to get old, if I'm going to get sick, I'm not going to be protected from this. What is the point, really? He was asking himself these questions, these deep questions. And we're told again he was taken out a third time by Channa, and this time saw a group of people carrying someone along on a litter, on a stretcher, and the person was motionless, they weren't moving. And Siddhartha said, well, what is this? What is this, Channa? And Channa said to him, well, Siddhartha, Prince, this is a dead person, this person has departed. And Siddhartha said, what does that mean? This person is dead. What does that mean? What does it mean that they've departed? Are they not going to see their family anymore? Are their loved ones not going to see them anymore? And Channa said, yes, this is death. This person isn't here anymore. And that will happen to you. That will happen to your loved ones. That will happen to your wife, to your son. We all die. And Siddhartha was really stirred up by these three sights that he'd seen: sickness, old age, and death. And we're told that he'd never seen them before. And it's possible, if you imagine a really sheltered existence that his father tried to create for him. But it could also be perhaps a story saying, well, it's as if he's seeing it, he's really seeing it. Maybe it's been around him, but he's not really taking it in. And suddenly he's in a particularly receptive state of mind where he's really seeing it, he's really taking this truth in. I'm going to die. I'm going to get sick. I'm going to get old. He's really seeing this for the first time, alongside the kind of what seems a futility of the wealth and the power, the hollowness of it. He's really seeing these truths, and he's kind of really perturbed, really unsettled by it all. And then we're told that Siddhartha is taken out a fourth time by Channa into the city. And this time he sees something which changes the course of his life, on the course of history, really, in the course of our lives. Because Siddhartha sees something that makes him radically change his life. He sees just a holy man, a wandering holy man, someone seeking the truth, trying to live a spiritual life, looking for answers, just walking mindfully through the city, holding a bowl full of food that he'd been out on a begging round that he collected, just walking very mindfully, steadily past their chariot. And Siddhartha saw something in this man that resonated with him, it chimed with him. And that sense of restlessness and discontent and agitation was transformed into a very clear sense of purpose, a conviction. This is what I have to do. This is what I have to do with my life. I need to do this. I need to follow the example of this man. So we're told that having seen this fourth sight, Siddhartha has this really clear conviction. He's going to go forth from his palace, from the life that he lives, and he's going to look for answers. He's going to lead a spiritual life. He's going to leave everything behind and just look for answers. And we hear different accounts of what happened. Some accounts say that his parents tried to stop him, they're very distressed. Other accounts say he slips out in the deep of night while everyone's deep in sleep, and Dave has opened the doors for him so he can leave without being disturbed. There's all kinds of kind of stories about and tales about how this happened, but the Buddha goes forth, he leaves the palace behind, and he looks for answers. He gets to the edge of the kingdom, the edge of his kingdom, cuts off his hair, swaps his robes with the clothes of a beggar, and looks for answers. He begins his spiritual quest. And we'll hear next week from Sangha Gita what happens next for the Buddha on that quest. But that is the start of the Buddha's journey, and you could say it's a universal story, really, because you could see in that story similar dynamics to everybody's spiritual life in a way. And you could say that the Buddha's metaphor of being asleep, it's these truths are around us all the time, reality is there all the time, but we're distracted, and we're kind of sleepwalking through life. We don't really see these truths, and we keep ourselves distracted from them, particularly in our culture. We don't really want to think about old age. We try to, there's all kinds of industries trying to stop old age, and we certainly don't want to think about death. We don't see death in our society in the same way as they might do in Asian cultures where you would see a dead body. We don't encounter death. We keep it all at arm's length. And we're able to distract ourselves in the same way that Siddhartha was able to be distracted all the time. We can just have the next TV series on demand. We can, we feel that discontent, that, oh, something's not right. Well, let's order something on Amazon and it'll come tomorrow and I'll feel better and I'll be distracted. And we can just have, the whole industries of distraction. We can keep ourselves distracted in that palace and never have to go outside of that palace and look at the four sights of life, really. We don't have to look at that. We can just stay distracted. But at the same time, there might be a sense of hollowness or of agitation or discontent. Something is missing, something's not right. But without that fourth sight, it's probably still going to stay in distraction. And our previous wheel series at Sangha was a wheel of life. We'll stay on that wheel going round and round unless we see that fourth sight, something that leads us and leads our life in a different direction. So all the time, reality is around us, but we're sleepwalking through life, we're not seeing it. But maybe occasionally we get jolted out of that, we get jolted awake just for a moment. It might be a brush with sickness or with death or aging, or reality is calling to us like that wandering holy man walking past us. We might see something of truth or beauty or read a passage in a book or something like that, just stirs us and makes us want to move towards a spiritual life. So I think it's important to reflect on this story of the Buddha and the four sights and reflect on them in our own experience. And when we encounter sickness and notice aging, maybe when we encounter death, we can reflect on them and wake up a little bit more. I think in the Buddha's case, he jolted awake. In my case, and maybe in your case, it seems to be more gradual. We kind of encounter these things and gradually, through contemplating them, wake up to these truths more and more deeply. We need to keep contemplating them. So in terms of old age, and I think, what I want to do is just share some of my experience of these four sights with you and keep an eye on the time as well. So in terms of old age, when I was a young man, the Buddha describes it as being intoxicated with youth. Like, I just couldn't imagine I would get old. I just couldn't imagine aging or being old. I knew people got old, but I couldn't imagine that happening to me. It's just, I would live just intoxicated by that youth, really. And health as well, just, you can't, and it's still the case when I'm healthy, I can't imagine not being healthy, just get intoxicated with that health. But when suddenly you're not healthy, it's terrible. And then you're healthy again. Yeah, it's like you're intoxicated again. I'm healthy, and you forget all about sickness, don't you? I suppose I had quite a close brush with ill health recently. I've had a family member who's had a life-threatening illness recently. So I've not been at Sangha night as much over the last part of this year, while a family member was getting treatment, and it's sobering. I mean, that term of being intoxicated and then being sobered, it's been a sobering experience to just have a close brush with ill health, really. It's sobering. And the same is true of death as well. When a loved one dies or you encounter death, it's sobering. And maybe it's sobering for a few weeks or a few months, or and then we kind of go back to sleep or we're distracted again. But it's sobering to encounter these things. So just a few examples. And I think living a Dharma life, being part of this Sangha, having access to the three jewels has enabled me to get gradually more used to these things, to sickness, old age, and death, to gradually get more used to them. The first time I really encountered death, sickness, aging, and death, was a friend of mine called Sue Siddy, who died. I don't know when he died, actually. I was trying to remember when he died, but maybe his plaque is on the Remembrance Garden outside, so we can find out when he died, but about 8 years ago, something like that. And he was the first chair of the Buddhist Centre, and he was known for his mindfulness and living a really simple life. He just lived on his own, very simply, gave away all of his wealth, really, to fund the centre in the early days of the centre. But when he started to get sick, I came back from my ordination retreat and I heard that he was sick, and I didn't want to see him. It's really interesting. I just didn't want to be around someone who was such a strong, vital, athletic man who was now sick. And I noticed, well, after about 6 months, I noticed I hadn't been to see him, and I thought, I used to see Susiddhi all the time, and I haven't gone to see him. And I realised that it's that discomfort of being around sickness and aging. So I made a commitment just to see Susiddhi every week, and that was a real privilege because he got progressively more ill and passed away, and I was able to witness that and be his friend whilst that was happening, and that was a real privilege actually. Very upsetting for a friend to die, but also just to witness that was a real privilege. And then I hadn't had much encounters with death prior to that, but a few more since then. Our teacher, Bhante Sangharakshita, died soon after that. And I was able to go and sit with his body at Adhisthana, where we have a retreat centre where Sangharakshita lived. His body was laid out and people could go and sit with his body. So I wasn't able to go to his funeral, so I went and made a point of just going and sitting with his body and meditating with his body, which was a very, very strong and moving thing to do. We don't usually see death and dead bodies, but I'd met Sangharakshita when he was alive, and just to see him no longer alive was very, very strong. Dharma Palata was a friend of mine who was in my chapter, and he came to the Buddhist Centre with a prognosis of like maybe 1 or 2 years he was told he would have to live by his doctors. He went on living about 10 or 11 years after that, and he kind of really confused the doctors why he kept on living, and he was given this name, protected by the Dharma Palata, because that's all the doctors could put it down to, like he just kept staying alive, really. And but he faced his death and his illness in an amazing way. He never complained about it, and he just always carried on in a really cheerful way, until one day he came to our chapter meeting and said, I've been told I've got 6 months to live. Kind of still seemed the same, carried on living in the same way, and 6 months later he did die. But very, very, what to say really, just very inspiring the way he approached his illness and his death. Just didn't let it define him in a way. But as a chapter, we went and sat with his body as well at the crematorium, and very strong thing to do. So we don't encounter death very often in our culture, but it's very sobering to contemplate it and to encounter death. What I will say, and I'm going to move away from death shortly, so hopefully you can bear with me if it's getting a bit heavy. A Sangha member, Julian, died recently, just before Christmas. I didn't know Julian well, but he would come to Sangha night and be in the mixed groups. And we heard from his wife that he'd suddenly got a diagnosis of cancer and passed away. And Sangha Jiva and I and Mahaprasada and Karmajit went to Julian's funeral. And I didn't really know Julian that well, but it was kind of partly the third and the fourth sight, really, just hearing about him, what an amazing person he was, from people rejoicing and celebrating him. It was really, really moving to hear this celebration of a wonderful man that Julian was. And it was both a third and a fourth sight, really, just being close to death with someone I didn't know that well. Really, really moved me. But also what moved me was hearing about his qualities, the qualities of this very, very generous man who was interested in Buddhism, who went out of his way to help other people. So death, sickness, old age, and death. The Buddha saw these as if for the first time, and it made him question life. And when you get a brush with these things, it can be sobering, and it can make you question, what is life for? But it's when you encounter the fourth sight, you get a sense of what life is for. You get a sense of, well, if life is fleeting, health could be taken at any time, I could die at any time. What's the point of life? The point of life is to awaken. You've got this precious opportunity to grow as a human being, to transform human consciousness, to become awake, to wake up from that sleep state and to see reality and to have no separation between self and reality and self and other. That is the point of life. And the Buddha saw that and realized that. And for me, my searching also began with a sense of hollowness and unease and discontent. I think as a teenager, And I remember at university, I just didn't have a sense, what is life for? I just really felt empty and discontent. Like, what is life about? What is life for? And I remember trying the things that you were supposed to try, relationships and career, and still thinking, this can't be it. What is life for, really? But I remembered when an opportunity, things kind of fell apart a bit, and I had an opportunity to do something different with my life. I remembered a couple of friends. One was a friend, childhood friend called Ben, and I remembered a friend from university, and they both had gone to live abroad, and they both were really friendly, kind people, and they seemed to have a great life. And I thought, I want to follow in their footsteps. I want to learn about them. So I decided to go traveling in a way, and also to kind of look for answers. So they inspired me to kind of look for answers, and it gave me a clue that kind of warmth and kindness and friendliness was important. I remember my RE teacher, Mr. Mann, in All Saints Catholic School, just kind of over there, a few miles over there, taught me to meditate, and also opened me up to being curious and asking questions about things. He was a fourth sight for me. But it was really when I came to the Buddhist Centre in 2004, and a significant fourth sight for me was meeting Vajratara, an order member called Vajratara. And she was one of the main teachers at the time here. She lives at Tiratnaloka Retreat Centre at the moment, and very significant order member in our order now. But she was standing here giving the talks at Sangha night, and she was in her 20s, and I was in my 20s. She was the same age as me. And she was very, very passionate about the Dharma, about the Three Jewels. I'd never met anybody or encountered anybody who was so passionate about something. She was just full of conviction that this was the right thing to do with her life. So much so that she'd given up on status and career and was living a very radical life, just doing this full time with her life, teaching people, making the Sangha and the Dharma available to people. And I was really struck by this and really inspired by this. And it made me want to do that. It made me want to follow in her footsteps. And at the time, I had started my own business. It was reasonably successful. And I still had this sense of unease and hollowness and discontent. Like, this can't be what, and then I saw in Vajratara a glimpse of what life could be about. And I decided to change my life based on meeting Vajratara and hearing her, or seeing her exemplify this deep conviction and passion for living a very radically different life. And I've got absolutely no regrets about doing that as well, actually. Just kind of, leaving my business behind and going to work in a gift shop, stacking shelves, Evolution gift shop in town that we used to have as a Buddhist business. And I remember when I had my business, I had a meeting with the sales director or something from the local radio. Hallam FM was a local radio station who was trying to kind of convince me to do some kind of business with them. And then a week later, he came into the Evolution gift shop to buy some candles for his wife, and I was stacking the shelves, and he was just really, really confused, like, what? He just couldn't understand, it was just such, it seemed a radical thing to do, and it was amazing. It's an amazing thing to do, just to kind of completely walk away from that and pursue something different, which seemed to have such value and meaning, was an amazing thing to do. And then after that, particularly Amoghavangsa, I don't think he's here tonight, he's often here at Sangha night. I saw in him just an example. He's a fourth sight for me. I saw an example of loving kindness in action. Just the way I would hear about loving kindness in Dharma talks and in meditation, but seeing how he would respond to me and other people, so inspiring. I thought, this is someone I can learn from. This is someone I want to follow. And I was talking to Moghavangsa yesterday, and he said, well, actually, I'm all foresights, because he's recently become really ill. He's old now. He's in his late 70s. He died and was resuscitated. He had a heart attack and was resuscitated. He says, I'm all foresights. So he can go and meet a Moghavangsa, and he is all foresights in one. So in a way, to conclude, what I wanted to evoke, well, a few things just to start the series off, get a sense of, well, through telling stories of the Buddha, you can really bring alive the Buddha, actually, the qualities of the Buddha and what it might have been like to meet the Buddha. And over the coming weeks, we're going to hear more stories of people about the Buddha's journey, and then about him encountering different people and bring the Buddha alive. And through that, it will activate, hopefully, those qualities in us, and we can bring those into our daily life. We can get more into relationship with the Buddha. But tonight's story tells the story of the beginning of a Dharma life, the beginning of a Dharma journey, this universal situation where reality can break in and jolt us momentarily awake, just wake us up, sober us, or we can be drawn out of it by something beautiful or something true, and we can be drawn towards our potential. So to close, I just want to make 2 points. And the first is that I've often reflected that the fourth sight, the man walking through the village, would have had no idea the impact of his action. Just straightforwardly walking past the chariot started a massive global religion, transformed human life, and is still reverberating like the effects. It's how this is affecting us today. Just one person walking mindfully through a village. So never underestimate the effect of ethical action. Now, your ethical action could really spark off another person, whether it's at your workplace or just a random stranger who sees you walking mindfully or responding with kindness or being patient or being generous. Those little acts, those small acts, ethical acts of virtue, could spark a global religion. You could spark a global religion through an act of kindness or generosity. So don't underestimate that. Make a lot of effort to be virtuous and to exemplify Buddhism for people, because you don't know what's going to happen. Very empowering to think that. And then the second thing is to just take into your discussion groups, what events have changed your life? What people have inspired you to change your life? What inspired you to come on the introductory course? What has inspired you to make changes in your life? It can be really inspiring to hear from each other about those people, those events that have inspired you to change. So that's what I'd like you to take into the discussion group. Come along for the rest of the series and you'll hear some amazing stories about the Buddha. And I recommend Encounters with Enlightenment. It's a really, really good book, and we'll share it on Slack and on the website and make it available, and you can get copies in the bookshop. So thank you very much. Thank you.